Start from there. Welcome to Restoring the Mind, where we discuss the mind and brain and all its domains. My name is Khalid Mahmood. Today's topic is climate deception is all about the oil. My guest this week is once again Thomas Pochari. He writes on World Affairs Monthly. Hi, Tom.
Yeah, hi, Khaled. Happy to have you call me back again.
Okay. Let's start. My first question is: you have heard about the climate change a summit going on in Glasgow.
Yeah,
A number of leaders have stayed absent away from this meeting, like Russia, China, Turkey. It seems all those in the Zionist camp have attended. Those that are not enthusiastic about Zionism have remained absent. Okay.
yeah, very astute.
What
Yeah,
do you think is all this climate deception or climate change? Is it all about?
well, very astute observation. I think you're right. The Zionists have kind of gathered together and thought, well, what are we going to do about this oil problem? So, as usual, I'm going to take the audience back in history a little bit, and let's start with Mr. James Hansen. Now, some of you may know this guy. He was an obscure guy at NASA, with a PhD, a gentleman with a PhD in physics. A very serious guy. I'm not at all saying he's not serious. So he worked at NASA, I think the Goddard Center or wherever back east, and he observed, or he was observing, in the 80s that there might be some evidence that the accumulation of greenhouse gases, namely CO2 and other ones, were basically causing the Earth to warm, the Earth's climate to warm. And the famous moment came in 1988 when he gave a talk to the, let's see, I'm reading from Wikipedia, the United States Senate Committee on Energy and Natural Resources on June 23, 1988. So you begin with this observation. Okay, maybe this is true, right, Khaled? I mean, everybody's going to say, well, wait a minute. This is America. This is the Western world. We observed something, and maybe it's true. Now, I think it's quite clear that the people in Washington, at first probably were shocked, and then because it was pretty obvious that we have a population problem globally, right? There's a lot of people on the planet. What was 7, 8 billion now? I don't even know the number. It's so large, and of course, everybody is more or less living in poverty. Out, other than of course, I'm sorry, everybody's living in poverty except the Western world, Western Europe, and the United States. This is 1988. All right, so uh, think about it this way. Um, Price of crude oil was falling in the mid 90s, began to fall. And it's just kept falling and falling and falling as the price, I mean, as the years went by. And in 1999, it bottomed out at about $10 a barrel. And the Zionists were jubilant, Kelly, right? And of course, nobody really knew that it would be bottoming and then start to rise. Nobody knew that. Maybe the Arabs were fearing that it might go on for 10 years. They were going to, the Arab Gulf there was going to default on their external debt probably within 5 years if things didn't change. The price of oil didn't go back up. So I think probably what happened is over time, uh, folks in Washington, the Zionists, Ashkenazi Jews, started to realize that a way to hammer the Arabs was to say, well, we can't really use their oil, we can't really burn their hydrocarbons, because if we do, we're going to cause global warming. We're going to cause the Earth to burn up, and people are going to die. The end of the world type scenario. So that's what I think. Now, uh, clearly, the Arabs are now making a lot of money. Of course, the price of oil has started going up because of China's development and other poor countries such as India. All over the world, people are beginning to realize that if you want to get some income, you're going to have access to hydrocarbons, namely crude oil and distillates, so you can move around, so you can build a factory, et cetera, et cetera. You're not going to do that on renewable energy, right? Everybody knows that. I would say that my friend Dave Cullum, is correct. I just interviewed him, and he pointed out, and I thought it was a brilliant statement, is that the Ashkenazi Jews in Washington have figured out that you can't really talk about the Club of Rome as they did in the 70s. Jimmy Carter, I mentioned in my interview with Gail Verberg. She's also very good. I recommend listening to her. She and I agreed that Jimmy Carter's discussion of scarcity of resources is not the way to go. You're not going to become very popular. In fact, you're going to be a one-term president. Everybody's going to dislike you. We have to preach prosperity. The Jewish Americans have to preach prosperity, never-ending prosperity. So what they have now is a very, very horrible quandary. They have to show the world that we're advancing, right? We're advancing, but we can only advance without burning hydrocarbons. Now, it's a little weird. It's pretty weird, but and I'm going to explain. It gets kind of dicey here, but let me explain. So, if you go back about 10 years, maybe a little bit more, and you, as I was, on CNBC.com or maybe another type of Western media, you would see the discussion of artificial intelligence as, oh my goodness, Khaled, it's going to take over the world. It's so powerful. Artificial intelligence, computers, it's going to overcome the brain. We're going to be, and this guy, Ray Kurzweil, a Jewish guy, Jewish American, he wrote a book about the singularity. Computers are going to take over the world, right? All right. Now, I'm afraid to say that Ashkenazi Jews really believe that. Now, you don't hear about artificial intelligence anymore. You don't hear about it. The second one I would mention is just died because, artificial intelligence is basically, very fast processing power. And you get the simulation of a brain in some respects because it's super fast processing power with a lot of power. Okay, now, then you have self-driving car technology. And this was promoted, I don't know, maybe exactly when, but CNBC, promotion of that was insane. And Google's, the Jewish Americans invested billions of dollars in these two technologies, a lot of money. And of course, it doesn't really work, right? All right. So I would argue that climate change is another one of these. They really believe in it. They think the world's going to come to an end. But in fact, CO2, carbon dioxide, is effectively a fertilizer. And photosynthesis depends on it. And the more CO2 you have in the atmosphere, the more green you're going to have. That is more photosynthesis. And the more green you have, the more oxygen will be emitted from those plants. And you're going to strike a balance at some time. Now, that's my impression. I'm not really into the nitty gritty of the science. I think it's pretty unclear what's going on. I mean, obviously, as Gail Verberg said, the climate is always changing, and so that's basically my argument. They really believe it. Now, do they want us to really seriously consider abandoning burning hydrocarbons? If we did, Khaled, we would all be so poor that there would be revolution, political revolution everywhere. I mean, how are you going to heat your house? You're not going to heat your house with renewable energy. Oh, thank goodness I don't live in a very cold climate. I know you do, but most people do, and it can be pretty cold. And so, how are you going to move around? How are you going to get your income? You can imagine that basically a life like the folks in Afghanistan have. Pretty miserable, where you're not even sure when you're going to get your next meal. All right, so that's basically how I see this. I really do think, and I feel sorry for them, that is these Ashkenazi Jews, they really do believe it. Now, so it's not really conspiracy. they really believed in artificial intelligence. They believe in these scams. They believe in their own stuff. They promote this stuff because they believe in it, and they invested enormous amount of money in it. And of course, it really doesn't exist. So climate change, more than likely, doesn't really exist. But for sure, if you can reduce the income of the Gulf Arabs and maybe make way for a greater Israel, that would be really cool.
Mm-hmm. True.
Well, how do you like my answer to your question?
I think it's quite very, very interesting. Well, can you go a little bit deeper into the why they want to kind of
Yeah.
control the oil so much? I
Well,
mean,
you told me that you wanted to do an interview on this topic, and I started to, think, so-called think about it and what I would tell you. And I have a terrible feeling that it's, maybe it's a little paranoid, but if we go back in history once again to the Bolshevik Revolution, Soviet Revolution, uh, Vladimir, what is it called, Lenin, and his Trotsky and these guys. This was pretty much a Ashkenazi Jewish political movement, pretty much. For example, the Cheka. Everybody can check on one of my statements here. The Cheka, which was the predecessor to the KGB during Lenin's power, when he was in power, was pretty much run by Jews, right? Russian Jews. Now, it was pretty clear at some point, I don't know exactly when, because I'd have to go to the history books or the internet, but it was pretty clear that the Russian Jews wanted to annihilate, exterminate the white Russians. They did. And so they said, okay, we're going to collectivize farming. And that is, we're going to, the state's going to own farms, and there's going to be no private farming. And according to Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the Ashkenazi Jews basically murdered about 6 million prosperous white Russian farmers called kulaks. And you can look at this up on the net. Okay, now that was happening, and I think it was becoming clear in Western Europe, and especially in Bavaria, where Adolf Hitler and these other guys were kind of noticing what was going on. And of course, Lenin's colleagues, many of them Jewish, Zinoviev, for example, they were mainly responsible for attempted coups against the German government from Moscow. They were trying to overthrow the German government and establish a communist regime. So you could argue, and I don't think anybody's done this yet. I guess maybe I'm the first one. You could argue that the German retaliation was basically what was going on. Germans did not, but especially the Christians from Bavaria, did not want this kind of shit to happen. Excuse me, this kind of stuff to happen in Germany. They didn't want to have a communist revolution, so they said, "Okay, we got to nip this we got to nip it in the bud. We got to." Okay, so they went after the Jews, right?
mm-hmm.
And now, how many Jews died in the so-called Holocaust? I think it's probably vastly exaggerated, but the fact is the Germans were retaliating, and they knew that communism, Jewish communism, was really a threat. So that's how I see it. Now, right now, I don't think you can, and this is where people might call me paranoid, but I don't think you can kind of dismiss the thesis that these Ashkenazi Jews in America, they came from Russia from 1880 to 1920 or so, a couple of million of them, and they're descendants. They are thinking that they basically want to turn the United States into its communist country, mostly. And
I
they
think it's
want to,
more than that. I think
yeah, and they want to, I'll
if we
just be
take
blunt.
your argument seriously, which I
Yeah,
don't know because whether it's historically fact or not, but
yeah,
let's say it is, just for the sake of the argument,
sure.
that the Hitler actually managed to delay the
Yes,
communism spreading in the European peninsula, the whole of Europe and everything. Okay, but
Oh, no question.
now we can see that communism is actually going all over the globe. I mean,
Yes,
they want to spread it everywhere. The whole
yes,
world is going to be one
yes,
big communist
yes.
state.
I keep saying yes because I totally agree with you. So I'm going to say something that sounds kind of paranoid,
Hmm.
but the Jewish Americans like to depict themselves as persecuted when they in fact rule the world and have 50% of the America's wealth. But they basically want to kill us.
Mm.
Yeah, Jewish Bolshevism is coming to America. I
Well, it's
could
coming to the whole
I could
world.
cite so many examples.
But
I mean, it's really quite frightening.
I mean, I think the reason I'm kind of agreeing with you is because Klaus Schwab, who's the CEO of World Economic Forum, he has
Yeah,
written a book, and in that book he says, he expects to see about 40% depopulation of the world.
yeah,
So when it's coming from horse's mouth, then
right.
I don't think we've got much choice but to agree with him. That's what
Well,
their plan is.
yeah. Remember though that without hydrocarbons, I think the population would decline, mostly because we are farming with hydrocarbons. We are fertilizing with ammonia, which comes from feedstock methane, and so without those hydrocarbons and without industrialized farming, we would have a farming output far lower, maybe who knows, 50% lower. We'd go back to 1900s and 1800s, early 1900s, 1800s, and probably 40-50% of the population would starve.
Hmm.
So I mean, yeah, but I think that Bolshevism is really the idea here. Look, we can see with the COVID and masks and vaccine mandates. I mean, look, they want to totally control your life
True.
with no evidence whatsoever. They don't care about the facts.
Mm.
I mean, we don't really know if the Earth is warming. Probably not. Maybe the climate is changing in some respects, but who can do anything about it? Gail Tverberg, you got to listen to her interview, destructivecapital.com. She's a very respected woman, and she says, well, we're not going to be able to do anything about this, even if it's true.
Okay. Um, I
Well,
think we will leave it at that. Although
okay,
interview is getting interesting, but I want to
yeah,
keep it short, and
yeah,
we'll include rest of the argument in the next
okay. So
video.
what do you think of my argument before you
Yeah, I
go?
agree. I agree with you. I mean, the thing is that there is a lot of death happening. I mean, this
Yeah,
you mentioned about vaccination, and 7 out of 10 deaths, COVID deaths that are happening in the UK are people who are being double vaccinated.
yeah, of
So
course.
there is a lot of people who are dying, and they are vaccinated. So
Okay,
I mean,
all right.
the facts speak for themselves.
Yeah, that's
So
right.
but there is a bigger agenda going on. I mean, I totally agree, and
Okay.
you're spot on that. I
Okay,
mean,
Khaled. Well,
okay,
thanks for calling as
thank you.
usual, and talk to you later.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, bye bye.
Bye. Bye.